What did humans do all day before jobs existed? No alarm clock, no boss, no office, no schedule telling you where to be at 8 in the morning. For most of human history, that was not a vacation. That was normal life. But here's the strange part. That does not mean people did nothing. Humans have always worked. They found food, they made tools, they built shelters, they cared for children, they carried firewood, they repaired clothing, they shared food, they moved camps, they watched the weather, they learned the land. But they did not usually have jobs in the way we think of jobs today. No company, no paycheck, no career ladder, no separate place called work. For most of human history, work was not something you went to. It was something woven into life, and that difference changes almost everything. Today, when we hear the word work, we usually imagine time. 40 hours a week, a morning commute, a lunch break, a calendar, a manager, a shift. But for ancient humans, time did not work like that. The day was not divided into work time and free time in the same way. There was no clock on the wall deciding when life started. There was hunger, there was daylight, there was weather, there were seasons, there was the group, and there was whatever needed to be done next. So the real question is not, did ancient humans work? Of course they did. The better question is, what did work look like before it became a job? For most of our species' history, humans lived as hunter-gatherers. That means they survived by hunting animals, gathering plants, fishing, collecting shellfish, digging roots, finding honey, making tools, and moving through landscapes they knew deeply. They were not wandering randomly. They were not helpless cave people waiting for civilization to save them. They had knowledge. They knew where water could be found. They knew which plants were edible. They knew which tracks belonged to which animals. They knew which seasons brought which foods. They knew where stone could be shaped into tools. They knew how to read signs that most modern people would miss completely. A broken branch, a footprint, a smell in the air, a change in birdsong. To survive, you had to understand the world around you. But this kind of work did not look like a modern job. A hunter did not clock in at sunrise and clock out at 5. A gatherer did not get paid by the basket. Children did not learn from textbooks. They learned by watching, playing, copying, failing, and trying again. Work and life were mixed together. Finding food could also be social. Making tools could also be teaching. Walking across the land could also be storytelling. A child watching adults prepare food was not at school in the modern sense, but they were learning. A group sitting near a fire was not off work in the modern sense, but they were resting, sharing information, building trust, telling stories, remembering dangers, planning tomorrow, and keeping the group together. That was part of survival too. And this is why it is so hard to compare ancient life to modern work. Some studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups have suggested that people may spend surprisingly few hours on direct food getting compared with a modern full-time job. But there is a catch. What counts as work? If someone spends 3 hours gathering food, then 2 hours preparing it, then time carrying water, making tools, caring for children, repairing shelter, sharing food, and moving camp, is that work or is it life? That question matters. Because if we only count hunting and gathering, ancient life can look surprisingly relaxed. But if we count every task needed to keep a group alive, the picture becomes more complicated. And that is the honest answer. Life before jobs was not endless leisure, but it was also not the same as a modern work week. It was something different, a world where survival tasks were spread through the day, a world where some days were intense, some days were slow, some seasons were abundant, some seasons were dangerous, a world where the line between work, family, learning, food, rest, and community was much less clear. Imagine waking up in a small camp. There is no alarm. You wake when your body wakes or when the camp starts moving around you. Someone checks the fire. Someone looks after children, someone repairs a tool, someone prepares to gather plants, someone watches the sky, someone remembers where animals were seen yesterday. The day begins, but not because a bell rings. It begins because life continues. Maybe the group needs food, maybe there is already enough food for the moment, maybe the weather is bad and people wait, maybe a hunting party leaves, maybe gatherers go toward a place where roots, berries, nuts, or plants are available. Maybe older people teach younger ones how to make something. Maybe children play with miniature tools, learning without realizing they are learning. Maybe people rest during the hottest part of the day. Maybe they talk, maybe they argue, maybe they sing, maybe they tell stories. This was not laziness. It was a different rhythm, and rhythm is the key. Modern jobs often force people into clock time, but ancient work was usually closer to task time. You did something because it needed to be done. When the task was finished, it was finished. You did not keep working just because the clock had not reached 5. That does not mean life was easy. Hunter-gatherer life could be dangerous. Injuries mattered, bad weather mattered, a failed hunt mattered, disease mattered, conflict mattered. Child mortality could be high. There was no hospital waiting nearby, no grocery store, no emergency delivery, no heating system, no police, no modern safety net. So we should not romanticize it. But we also should not imagine ancient humans as miserable people working every waking second. They were human beings. They rested, they laughed, they played, they cared for each other. They had rituals. They made art. They decorated objects. They told stories. They watched children grow. They knew boredom, fear, hunger, love, grief, and joy. They were not less human than us. They were us, living under different conditions. Then something changed. Around 12,000 years ago, in different parts of the world, some human groups began relying more heavily on farming. This did not happen everywhere at once. It was not a single invention that instantly replaced hunting and gathering. It was a long, uneven process. In some places, people cultivated plants while still hunting and gathering. In other places, farming became the center of life. But once agriculture took hold, it changed the rhythm of human existence. Farming created a new relationship with time. You could not simply move whenever you wanted. Fields had to be cleared, seeds had to be planted, crops had to be protected, water had to be managed, harvests had to be gathered, food had to be stored, animals had to be watched. Seasons became deadlines. A farmer could not tell the grain, "I'll do it next week." The crop had its own schedule, and suddenly human life became tied more tightly to land, seasons, storage, and repeated labor. Agriculture could produce more food in one place. That was powerful. It allowed larger villages, then towns, then cities. It allowed some people to specialize: toolmakers, priests, soldiers, builders, administrators, merchants, rulers. But it also created new pressures. Stored grain could be counted. Counted grain could be taxed. Land could be controlled. Workers could be organized. Surplus could feed armies. And once societies became larger and more complex, work became easier to command. This is one of the biggest changes in human history. Work slowly became separated from ordinary life. Not completely, not everywhere, but more and more. In a small foraging group, work was often organized around kinship, need, sharing, and survival. In farming societies, work could become tied to land, debt, tribute, tax, status, and power. Now someone might work not just because the group needed food today, but because a ruler demanded grain, because a temple needed labor, because a landlord controlled the field, because a debt had to be paid, because the harvest belonged partly to someone else. This does not mean farming was simply bad. Agriculture helped create civilization as we know it. It made possible cities, writing, large-scale architecture, states, armies, trade networks, and eventually the modern world. But it also changed the human day. The more food humans produced, the more humans could be organized. And the more humans could be organized, the easier it became for work to become an obligation controlled by others. Over time, people began doing more specialized work. A potter made pots. A blacksmith worked metal. A scribe recorded accounts. A soldier served a ruler. A builder built walls, roads, temples, and palaces. A sailor transported goods. A merchant sold them. This was closer to jobs, but still not quite the modern idea. For much of history, your work was often tied to your family, your village, your social class, your gender, your land, or your legal status. Many people did not choose a career. They inherited a role, or they were born into one. A peasant did not usually ask, "What do I want to be when I grow up?" The answer was often already around them. The field, the animals, the household, the family craft, the obligations, the tax collector, the seasons. For most people, work was still not a separate identity in the modern sense. It was part of who they were because of where they were born. Then came another huge shift: wage labor. Instead of producing mostly for your household, your village, your lord, or your land, more people began selling their time and labor for money. This existed in ancient and medieval worlds too, but it became much more central with modern capitalism and industrialization. And industrialization changed work again. Factories needed people to arrive at a certain time. Machines needed regular schedules. Employers needed workers to be present together. Time became something that could be measured, sold, wasted, disciplined, and punished. Before this, many kinds of work were task-based. You worked until the task was done. But factory work was different. You worked because the clock said the shift was not over. The clock became powerful. The bell rang. The shift began. The shift ended. The worker became attached to measured time. This is where the modern job becomes recognizable. A workplace separate from home, a boss, a schedule, a wage, rules, productivity, punctuality, timekeeping. A life divided between work and not work. And once that division became normal, it changed how people saw themselves. You were not just a person who made shoes, you were a shoemaker, not just someone who worked in a factory worker, not just someone who taught, a teacher, not just someone who managed accounts, an accountant. Work became identity. And today, one of the first questions people ask is, what do you do? They usually do not mean, what do you love? What do you know? Who do you care for? What stories do you tell? What land do you know? What community are you part of? They mean, what is your job? That is strange when you think about the full timeline of human history. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived without resumes, without job interviews, without promotions, without corporate ladders, without inboxes, without Monday mornings. But they did not live without work. They lived with work that was closer to survival, place, skill, family, and community. And then slowly, work became organized into systems: fields, taxes, states, trades, guilds, markets, factories, offices, careers. The modern job is not the same thing as work. It is one particular way of organizing work, and it is a very recent one. That may be the most important point. We often talk as if jobs are natural, as if waking up, commuting, working under a schedule, earning wages, and building a career is simply what humans do. But for most of human history, nobody lived like that. Humans work because life required effort, but they did not always build their entire identity around a job. So what did humans do all day before jobs existed? They lived, they searched for food, they made things, they repaired things, they watched children, they learned, they taught, they moved, they rested, they shared, they argued, they celebrated, they survived. Some days were probably hard, some days were probably slow, some days were probably dangerous, some days were probably beautiful. The past was not paradise, but it was not just a worse version of the present either. It was a different way of being human. And the biggest difference might be this. For ancient humans, work was part of life. For modern humans, life is often organized around work. We did not invent work. Work was always there. But we did invent something much stranger: the job, a system where time becomes money, where identity becomes occupation, where survival becomes a schedule, and where one of the most human questions, what did you do today, slowly turned into something else. What do you do for a living?